I said to her, I said, I don't want to give up on my family. And without even missing a beat, she said, what family?
Welcome to the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel with John McKenney and Padideh Jafari.
Hi Padideh, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. It's another episode of the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. How have you been?
I've been doing well, just sort of busy with the law firm, but otherwise doing well.
I imagine law work very definitely keeps you busy, especially if you're in divorce law these days. What is it, like 56% of everybody who marries gets divorced?
Actually, in LA County, where we practice law, it's 62%.
Go figure. There's a surprise.
And that's on the first marriage. The second marriage is 72%, and the third marriage is in the 80s. So, yes.
My gosh.
Actually,
Wow.
divorce attorneys in LA say it is a starter marriage. So your first marriage is your starter marriage, like you buy a starter home, because it's almost like, no offense, but it's almost like a joke.
So interestingly enough, both you and I are divorced. We've not kind of made any secret about that. We each divorced Narcissist. How long ago was yours?
Oh my goodness. I believe 15 years ago now.
Was it really that long?
Yes.
Wow. And mine was, I'm coming up on 5. So what I call my freedomversary is coming up very shortly. So
I love that. Freedomversary.
yeah.
That should
So
be-
yes, I replaced my anniversary with a freedomversary. So the day I got notice that my divorce was official, that is my freedomversary day, and I celebrated every year the freedom I have from the narcissist who was in my life.
That sounds great. I think I will use that, although it's been so long for me that I don't really even celebrate or not celebrate that. I just feel
Yes.
like I'm celebrating. I will give you a little bit of good news is I am celebrating my 3rd year anniversary to my current and final husband next week.
So the starter marriage is done.
The starter marriage is done. Second marriage, and April 2nd, we're celebrating.
Wonderful.
So I'd rather celebrate that
Congratulations.
than the
That's wonderful.
freedomversary.
Yeah, I'm not remarried, so I'll keep celebrating my freedomversary.
That
But
sounds good.
I have a question for you, something I've been thinking about here lately. There are a lot of our listeners out there who left a narcissist, who left kids, who left family, who left situations and things that behind that were important to them. And I wonder if we didn't feel some guilt for walking away, even though we were in a situation where we were mentally and emotionally abused.
That's a good question.
So I was trying to look back on some of the things in my own life, and thinking back through it. And part of me, there's a part of me that when I did get the message, got the email, or actually the call from my attorney who said, guess what? You are legally divorced. I can remember exactly where I was, etched in my mind. I was in the gym locker room. I just finished a workout, and I can remember hanging up the phone and sighing, and then going and jumping up and down with my hands in the air, going, woohoo, woohoo. I was so excited to be out. And then it settles in, I think, what's actually taken place, and this person who you loved, or even perhaps still love, you can still love somebody and divorce them, and you feel guilt over leaving them, and I think I felt some guilt over that, particularly where it came to the kids and those kinds of things. I felt like I was, now again, I should qualify, all of my kids were out of high school. I waited until they were out of high school and into college. 2 of them were already graduated even from college, 2 were still in college. when I left, but there was this feeling like I was abandoning them to just her, even though I had no intention of ending relationship with them in any kind of way. And I felt like I had given up on something that I wish would have worked out. And I think that haunted me for a long time. I wondered if I was a failure, I wondered if I was a quitter. And at the same time, I was in such a bad place emotionally. I don't, like, I had to do it to protect my own life all at the same time. There was no other option. I felt like, it was 27 years of marriage, and I got to this place. I could not go any further, and it was like, it was the right decision. Like, I have absolutely no qualms about that. It was the right decision. But there was a nagging guilt over it, over what I'd left behind, that I think haunted me for some time. So I was wondering, did you feel that as well? Did you feel guilt over leaving, over your situation when you divorced?
I think it's such a great question because I think what happens is with these narcissist or cluster B personality disordered people, what happens is they always sort of attach to empaths and sympathetic people by nature, right? And
Very true. Very true.
And so for me, I had a tremendous amount of guilt. Even though we did not have children together, I did have a stepdaughter who I loved. I was in her life for 7 years, from the age of 7 to 14. So I didn't want to leave sort of my family. And I'll never forget this conversation I had with my mom, who is in her 90s now. I said to her, I don't want to give up on my family. And without even missing a beat, she said, "What family?" And I said, "What are you talking about? I've been with this person for 7 years.
Wow.
I love him. I love my stepdaughter." And she said, "Your spouse is supposed to have your back. That's what makes them your spouse, is that they have your back. They're for you. They're not working against you." And she said, this family that you have, that you keep saying, "I don't want to leave my family," is like a figment of your imagination. Because it's not a real family. It's you doing all the work for him and obviously my stepdaughter, but it's not him even showing up for you. And she said an example of my father. She said, "Even though your father and I are really different, he has always had my back." And when she said that, it was sort of like an aha moment for me, because I looked back at the last 7 years of how my spouse didn't have my back. And so it really kind of made me realize that I needed to cut the cord. And I was a divorce attorney at the time, but we went to a mediator friend of mine, and again, we didn't have a child, so there was no custody issues. It was just material things that we had acquired. And long story short, she drafted the documents, but it took me 3 years to actually sign the final document, because I subsequently moved to New York for a number of years. I started teaching at NYU. It wasn't a priority. And there was this nagging thing about, well, what if we get back together? And what if God, in his infinite wisdom, is going to cure, this thing that this man has, which I didn't at the time know it was narcissism. But what if, I wanted to give that space. And even though I had now moved, part-time to New York, and I was bi-coastal, and my mom finally said to me after 3 years, "What are you doing? You're still attached to this person, and you need to finalize this." And my ex-husband was he said to me, he's like, I'm dating this girl. He dated this girl right after we separated. Actually, he was dating her probably while we were still married, and I'm still
Yeah.
not, I haven't acknowledged that in my brain. But he said, I've been dating her for 3 years and she wants me to finish our divorce. Like, she wants me to do this. And I said, okay, I'm fine. I'm ready to do it. And so we went back to the mediator friend of mine, who's now actually a judge in Los Angeles County. And she finalized the documents, and 2 things I asked for, and only 2 things were my engagement ring and my dog, Zoe. And he even said, well, I want visitation with Zoe. And I said, okay, and that was kind of like something we laughed about. And we signed the paper. We went to the garage together. And I'll never forget this. It was like he gave me a hug and he was like, I'm sorry, and had tears in his eyes. And I'm just thinking to myself, oh my gosh. Like, again, that was like the guilt thing. Like, I was happy on one respect. On another respect, I had guilt because I had been this person's savior, I felt like, for 7 years. And then the other half, I was like, this is finally freedom.
Yeah.
So it was a range of emotions. And then I gave him a hug and I said, okay, and I got in the car and I sobbed. I not like cried, I sobbed all the way to my mom's house. And, I had guilt after that point of finally signing the divorce document for the next 2 years. So it took me 2 years to just forgive myself and, forgive myself for, I don't know what it is, like not being good enough, not trying hard enough, all the things, all the emotions. And then it took 8 years from the time, like 2010 when we filed for the divorce. It took 8 years before I finally realized I'm ready to start a real meaningful relationship with someone else. So this, and by the way, again, we did not have children. So you can imagine how much more difficult it is for someone that has a child that is constantly connected to their co-parent because of the child.
That's absolutely something more to think about. I'm fascinated by something you said, and it goes back to, was it your mom that said this to you? That she basically said this is not a marriage, if for lack of a better phraseology. And I think that's kind of what got me out of this whole idea of guilt over it. And I felt the same kinds of things you did as well, where it was, I don't like to lose. I didn't want to lose. I didn't ever want to be divorced. Like, I didn't ever want to be a divorced guy. Then there are religious implications as well. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ and consider myself a Christian, and I not raised with divorce, and from a religious perspective don't believe in it as well. So that also had some impact and bearing on my situation too. But I think the thing that got me out was having to go back and assess what a marriage really is and what a marriage really is not. So as I thought about it, I thought there are people in life who enter into a legal agreement, and marriage is a legal agreement, legally binding agreement. And as they enter into this thing, right? There are people who enter into legally binding agreements and they're not really married. There are people who buy a house together and they're not married. There are people who have children together and they're not married. So you have a legal document, you have kids, you have a house, you have things together. And it begs the question, what is a marriage? What's at the center of it? And ultimately, what I concluded was this. A marriage is a love relationship of choice where you, like you described, you are present for each other. And that's something that was promised up front, and that was something that was never delivered on for me. So I felt like I had all the icing and I had no cake. There was no substance to it. And icing by itself is just terrible. So I had a house. Yeah, I had kids. Yeah, we had cars. Yeah, we had rings. Yeah, we had this legal document that said we were married. But what qualified it all as a marriage was actually the relationship at the center. And a real marriage kind of spins, these things spin off of that. You have kids from that love relationship. You have a house from that love relationship. You have a legal agreement from that love relationship. You have cars because of that love relationship. You have rings because of that love relationship. And my conclusion was, and this will sound ridiculous for a guy who was legally married for 27 years. I was legally married, but I think never emotionally married in any kind of way. And to me, that's kind of the real marriage. That's what I signed up for in the whole thing. And by her own admission, she said, look, we were done at 3 months into the relationship, and she just kept using me and pretending, and it ended there. My marriage literally ended right there. That was the point of discard for her, where she said, okay, I just don't want anything to go do with this anymore. 3 months in, gave some lame excuse for leaving the situation or leaving emotionally and never returning, and felt no remorse over it whatsoever. So I had to go back and realize that my marriage, even those first 3 months, probably never really were what I thought they were. And I was attached to something that never really existed more than anything else, and I felt guilt over that.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm recalling a conversation that Johnny Depp was talking to Amber Heard, and they played this tape. She was actually taping him to use it against Johnny Depp in the trial, but it actually backfired on her. He said, I never knew you. You were a figment of my imagination. You were everything I built you up to be in my mind, but in reality, I never knew you. And if you've never heard that audio, please go listen to it.
Well, it just so happens that I happen to have the quote here, and here's the exact quote from Johnny Depp. He said this: I loved you for so many fucking years, but you know what? You didn't exist. You don't exist. You're not there. You're not there. You're a fucking made-up thing in my head. Again, that's Johnny Depp in a recording that Amber Heard actually made of him.
Literally, he has so much pain in his voice now, whether you think, Johnny Depp is a narcissist or Amber Heard is or whatever but like, that is exactly what it's like to be in a relationship and marriage with a narcissist. You never knew them, because if you knew
all the icing, no cake.
Yeah, if you knew them, if you knew your ex-wife, who she was, would you have ever married her?
Hell no. There's no way. Absolutely. If I thought it was going to go the way it's gone, this is not what I signed up for. Who wants to go restart their life later on and have to go start over from complete scratch in almost every facet of your life? This is not what I dreamed of.
Right.
There's no question about that.
Today, the person that I am, 15 years later after the divorce, is so different than who I was, the girl that, said I do, 28, 29, right? So, and he made, the great thing about my ex-husband, who is a malignant narcissist, is he painted this perfect picture of what life would be, and his devotion to me and my family, who I'm very close with. As you know, I'm Iranian, and I just fell in love with the story of this fairy tale that never materialized because he was not genuinely who he said he was. And
it's their own fairy tale also, and they're pretending to be somebody they're not from the beginning. So, is a legally binding agreement even valid when somebody makes ridiculous statements or pretends completely that something is that it's not, and you get into this legal agreement, you go, wait a minute, this isn't right. And those are the kinds of things that ultimately go to court,
Right.
which is divorce.
Right. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right when you say there's a cake, and the cake looks great, right? Because it's got the icing. I'm thinking about my wedding cake, like it's got the icing. I had a huge bow on the cake because my second dress had a big bow on the back, and so I wanted to match it. And like, I can see that, what you're saying, like I can visualize it because I'm such a visual person. But then you cut into the cake, and you're like, there's nothing here but this beautiful
Yep.
exterior. And that, I think, John, you just described like the narcissist to a T, because
It's a shell.
it's and it looks so good. They just look so good from the outside, and that's why it's also very difficult to convince other people that there's no depth, there's nothing there. Because the outside, they only see the outside, and the
Correct.
narcissist has like completely like made the outside look so beautiful with this big bow, and then you're like, but no, there's nothing there, and they're abusive, and they've done this, and they call me names, and they hit me, or for me it was like, he was a sex addict, so it was like pornography and physical abuse towards the end, and it's like, what are you talking about? Like, they didn't want to believe me because they're like, it looks so good from the outside.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's wrap this up. I mean, are there people out there, or there are listeners who we care deeply about, even though we don't know them, and that's why we do this. If you feel guilt over having left for whatever reason, I'd say a couple of things. From a religious perspective, I would tell you, I don't believe God meant for you to be abused by your spouse emotionally or otherwise. And I personally believe as well that emotional hurts can even be worse than physical ones. Padideh and I both sat with a group of veterans who had gone through something like this with their spouses. And I asked a question, and I said, would you rather be shot at, or would you rather go through what you've been through with a narcissist? Hands went up, 100%, I'd rather be shot at than have to go through the emotional pain of this. So I don't believe God ever intended for that. So ultimately, again, the emotional wounds can be as deep or deeper than physical wounds. And the second part of that is realizing what you had or actually didn't have. And remember, the narcissist was pretending. They entered into an agreement with you of pretending they were something that they were not. And again, as soon as you got married or got involved with them, things started to change, and they became this other kind of person, which is a relationship of using and not loving. And I will tell you that once I realized that I never really had the relationship I thought I had, and that it was all under false pretenses from the beginning. My ex was gracious in this to me and told me in front of my pastor, well, I never really loved you. So those kinds of things help you understand and go, okay, well, you know what? I was fooled from the beginning. I was duped. And for that reason, I honored it as best I could for as far as I could possibly go with it. And then from then on, it had to end, and there's really no reason for guilt over that. If you gave it your best and you tried to make it work, and the narcissist would not allow, there's no guilt and no shame in that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. And you know what? Even if you have to go through, because I feel like you do have to go through the grieving cycle, John. Yes, okay, now you're divorced from them, but like, what's the next step? I would just encourage you, and I know you probably agree, is to, seek therapy and make sure that therapist understands narcissistic abuse, because many therapists that we've talked to, like, they don't understand that. And then also, work out, go for hikes. I know it's so difficult that we have an episode actually about that with
Work on you.
Luke Holbrook, who talks about, working out, like go to the gym, go on walks, really figure out like sort of your part in this and start your healing journey. But you have to go through the grieving cycle. I mean, that's just, don't deny yourself that. For me, it took 8 years. Married 4.5 years, knew him 7 years total, but it took 8 years. People sometimes say, well, it takes half of the length of time you've been with someone. Not if you were with a narcissist. I would say it takes a year. And I'm sorry, because I know you were with her for 27 years, but for me, it took a year. Every year that I was with him, I had to spend a year of healing. So 7 years, 8 years I took, separated from him and healed before I got into a new relationship. And so go through that grieving process, and please don't talk about it to people that have never been through narcissistic abuse, because they will not understand it.
No, they'll never get it. No, you have to have been through it.
And, there are so many resources now, free resources like YouTube, Instagram, podcasts like ours. Really start your healing process for yourself, and you will realize at the end of your healing, which I think like we're always healing because of these people, but you'll realize at some point you had to let them go, or else they were going to drown you.
Yep. So as you think about these things, be free of guilt. Be free of guilt. Don't live encumbered by that. That's who you were. That's not who you are, and it's not about your future. And if you have questions about that, reach out to us on narc.podcast on Instagram, or Padideh is at Jafari Legal on Instagram as well. And I am Male Victims of Female Narcissists on Instagram too. And it's important to live your life guilt-free. There's nothing you could have done to have made it work. This is the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. I'm John McKenney, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you for listening to the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To hear other episodes or read the associated blogs, visit www.narcissistabuserecoverychannel.com, and be sure to follow us on Instagram with the handle narc.podcast. The guest views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are their own. The information presented is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. The co-hosts are not licensed therapists. Seek professional help, as information is often state-specific. The Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel is produced in studios in California and Georgia.